Welcome into the Fantasy Football Diagnostics Podcast, where we provide you with your weekly diagnosis of everything fantasy football. Whether it's season-long leagues, dynasty, DFS, or sometimes even IDP, we got you covered all year long. Let's do it. Let's get to it. Welcome into the Fantasy Football Diagnostics Podcast. It is Tuesday, December 10th, 7 a.m. Eastern. And it's the Week 15 waiver show, aka the first round of the playoffs, the fantasy football playoffs waiver show. So, hopefully you guys are in. I know it's a tough situation if you, for whatever reason, had to go against Josh Allen and you don't make it in, or maybe you have Josh Allen and you make it in, and it's great to be on that side of that. Maybe you have a Jordan Addison or a Puka Nacua, or one of these guys that had a big game, a Jamar Chase that had a big game to help get you in to your fantasy football playoffs, or maybe you just missed, which happens, for sure. In what is it? 4 of my 5 redraft leagues, I made it to the playoffs, but all I think about is the one of the 5 that I didn't. Of my 11 dynasty leagues, I made it in 8 of them to the fantasy football playoffs. So it's, we don't all bat 1,000 here, especially, if you had to suffer from some injuries or from some adversity, it happens for sure. But just happy to be here on here with you guys, helping you guys through this fantasy football playoffs. If you've been listening all season, or if you're just coming on now to take a listen and ride this one out here as we approach the fantasy football playoffs. And if you didn't make the playoffs, right? Let's say you only have 1 league or you have 2 leagues and you didn't make it in any of your leagues, right? You had some bad luck. You were the highest scorer, but your opponents also, you have the most points against you, but also the most points for, and you're sitting there in like 8th place or 7th place with the most points, but you're not in, or 3rd most points and you're not in. Or maybe you just had a bad luck, a bad run of injuries. And you're probably like, well, why do I need to keep listening, right? Like, why do I need to keep coming on here? And then I'll say it's because you want to make sure you're paying attention, around this time, so that when next year comes, some of these players that, are going to make a name for themselves in the fantasy community, over these next 3 weeks here, guys that we otherwise wouldn't have, you wouldn't have heard about or really listened to. Next year, when you see the ADP and you're like trying to figure out, oh, why is everyone so high on this guy, right? It's going to be because of some of these weeks right here. I mean, the example that Greg and I used to use, if you've listened to this when me and Greg used to do this together, right? We talked about AJ Brown all the time, because AJ Brown had, at the end of his rookie year, he had a phenomenal run to close out the fantasy playoffs. And I just remember saying, like, hey, AJ Brown's going to be one of my guys next year. He's going to be one of my guys next year, one of my guys. And this was back when he was in Tennessee. And then the following year, it was like, yeah, no, I'm all in on AJ Brown. And it was a lot of it about what he had done at the tail end of his rookie season to close out that fantasy playoffs, right? It's like, look at what Chase Brown's doing right now. And it's like, well, if you were paying attention last year near the end of the year, when Chase Brown was getting some work behind Joe Mixon, I can't remember exactly what it was, if it was for Joe Mixon was injured or whatever the reason was, right? We watched those games and we're like, okay, well, Chase Brown can play, right? And look what he's doing now, right? So whether you get knocked out, whether you don't make it, I'll still be coming on here, even if I get eliminated in all my playoffs this week for whatever reason. I'll be back on here, continuing to give advice and continue to try to help you guys out in the best way that I can. Um, but yeah, it is tough if you don't make it. I know it's really sobering, but um, it's part of the game that we play, right? It's a double-edged sword. You win some, you lose some. If you ever played any competitive sport or um, any competitive game in your life, right? You'd understand that that happens, right? You're not going to win every game you play. So don't be the person that has the take my ball and go home energy, right? Like don't be dropping all your players in the leagues. Um don't be, if you're a non-playoff team, don't go in there like adding a bunch of players so that nobody else can have them, right? Don't be that person in your league. Because at the end of the day, some of these leagues, they're played for money, so you don't want to be disrupting people's pockets potentially there, right? Now, if there's a last place punishment or something like that, then absolutely, yeah. You know what? Like you don't want to, end up in a McDonald's for 24 hours. Then yeah, do what you have to do to not end up in that McDonald's for 24 hours, right? But if there's no prize on the line, typically what I would do is just let everybody get first dibs on waivers, and then maybe like that Sunday before or that Saturday before, if I really want to set a lineup because I'm just like I want to keep playing, then yeah, maybe I'll go in there and make some transactions. But that's after I've given everybody the essentially the first right of refusal there. Um, Now, I had talked about like potential tips for people that have the bye week this week, right? If you got the bye week, you're kind of chilling, right? Looking ahead to week 16, you're like, okay, well, if I play this person, I could play that person. Maybe you're not even really thinking about that, right? There's not a whole lot you could do there. You want to try to get cute and block them from picking people up. Like you don't, I maybe what's going on. There's no bye weeks to anticipate, but like maybe there's an injury or whatever. But they're probably already dealing with that, right? So me, I'm probably looking at defenses, trying to see if I'm been streaming quarterbacks or streaming defenses. I'm trying to look a week ahead at those guys and see, okay, who can I play in week 16? Maybe who can I play in week 17 as well. Um, then you also want to be looking at the matchups. Maybe you have guys in a tough matchup the week after, so you want to look for some possible replacements after that. But one of the biggest pieces of advice that I'll always give, if you have a bye week in your fantasy football playoffs and you're playing in a league like Yahoo, for example, that allows you to drop players after they've already played, bench your entire lineup. Just move everybody in your starting lineup to the bench. Don't set a lineup. Because what that'll allow you to do is it'll allow you to drop players that have already played, right? And the example that I always use is I gave this piece of advice to one of my buddies a while back. This was when Calvin Ridley was on the Atlanta Falcons, so that's how long ago it was. And Calvin Ridley he had the first round bye, he benched his entire roster, and Calvin Ridley in the middle of the game, the first round bye, during the first round bye, gets like I think it was like a foot sprain or something, or some lower body extremity injury. And my buddy was able to drop Calvin Ridley mid game and then like pivot to another option for the week after, right? Whereas if he had set a lineup, Calvin Ridley was on a roll at that time. Calvin Ridley would have been in his starting lineup, and he wouldn't have been able to do that, right? Because it would have been like, oh, you can't drop a player who's in your lineup, right? So it's one of the I think it's one of the biggest pieces of advice that you could give to a person who's got a bye week, right? Again, this is dependent on how your league is, the league rules are set up. But I know in Yahoo, I know for a fact you can drop players after they've already played. I'm not sure if that's the default setting. I mean, it is, most definitely is a default setting, but I don't know if there's like rules that you can, the commissioner can go in league settings and change that. But I know for a fact that in Yahoo that works. Sleeper, that is a preference setting that you have to set. So it's possible that in your sleeper league, that might be the case as well. But you want to just be able to maintain that flexibility. If there's an injury that happens, or maybe somebody loses their job or something, is benched, and you want to pivot to somebody else. But this will allow you to do that. But as always, guys, do have to call to action. Please make sure you like, comment, subscribe, whether you're watching on YouTube, Twitch, X, Instagram, Spotify, whether you're listening on Apple Podcasts, Spotify, Google Play, or wherever you get your podcasts. Just please, if you could comment, like, subscribe, goes on to help the show a ton. We're trying to increase the subscribership on YouTube. We're about at 115 subscribers right now. Would love to get to 200 before the end of the year. So if you're not already subscribed, please go ahead and do that. But it is the Week 15 Fantasy Football Waiver Show, so let's get into it. Guys, this week it's not about really the stashes, right? This is about guys that can help you this week. We'll talk a little bit about some, that in greater detail when we get to the running back position. But there's no bye weeks. There's none of that stuff, right? You're even competing with less teams potentially for some of these guys on waivers, so we don't have to go super deep here. But everybody I'm bringing up is somebody that I feel like can help you this week. So starting with the quarterback position, only got two guys here, and the first guy is Cleveland quarterback Jameis Winston, available in 66% of Yahoo leagues. And again, it's the playoffs, guys. It might be emergency glass time every week, especially if you've been streaming the position. I really like Jameis, not just this coming week against a Kansas City defense who came into Week 14 allowing the 7th most fantasy points to the position, but also like him a lot next week as well against the Cincinnati defense who's coming into Week 14 allowing the 2nd most fantasy points to the position. Now again, Jameis is all about the pass volume there, right? Like we saw what he was able to do in a mid matchup against the Pittsburgh Steelers, was able to still finish as a top 12 quarterback there. So definitely a guy that I think we can go to, in some dire straits, right? If you are streaming the position there. So, actually Jameis finished as a quarterback 13. Rats. Anyway, moving on to the next guy on this list, New York Jets quarterback Aaron Rodgers, available in 66% of Yahoo leagues, coming off his best passing game of the season yardage wise. Actually, that's the best since 2021, but he's playing this weekend against a Jacksonville defense allowing the 9th most fantasy points to opposing quarterbacks coming into Week 14. It's definitely tough to trust Rodgers. He has not looked really good at all this year. I mean, there was people look at the stat line and the numbers and like, oh wow, look at Rodgers. He threw for over 300. Should have been for at least 400. Honestly, if we were watching the game, right? He missed Garrett Wilson a decent amount of times. But this Jacksonville defense has been, one to allow a decent amount of fantasy production to opposing quarterbacks. And again, if you were playing in a deeper league, there's no real quarterback injuries right now. But if you're playing in a super deep league, then Aaron Rodgers makes some sense there, as a waiver wire option for you. Moving on to the running back position. And I know we've been getting into, running backs that are available and, notable in 50% of Yahoo leagues, but we've got a decent amount of running back pickups. And so for the running back position, it's going to be guys that I think we should pick up. Again, you know the normal names to stash, right? But then there's going to be some of these other guys that I think are in that in between a stash and could also have a role on Sunday that might be worthy of your attention, right? So let's start with the priority pickups here at the running back position. And first up is Jacksonville running back Tank Bigsby, available in 54% of Yahoo leagues, and we're so back, baby, with Bigsby. He out-touched Travis Etienne 19-8, seeing 18 carries, which he converted to a modest 55 yards and a touchdown. But that Tennessee matchup is a tough one. He's got a matchup coming up this week against a New York Jets defense that has gotten a little bit better stopping the run and tackling, but still 17th or entered week 14 as allowing the 18th most fantasy points to opposing running backs. Tank Bigsby is going to get this volume, then he's got to be worthy of a pickup with this workhorse type usage here. Tank Bigsby, I mean, there's some guys that and we'll talk about a lot of these guys coming up, but there's a certain guy in particular that I'm not really interested in trusting this week in the fantasy football playoffs specifically, but we'll talk about him in a little bit. But the next running back on this list is New York Jets running back Isaiah Davis, available in 89% of Yahoo leagues. With Breece Hall out for the New York Jets in week 14, we saw this backfield become a true two-man backfield with a dead-even split with 16 opportunities apiece between Braylon Allen and Isaiah Davis, with Isaiah Davis scoring the lone running back touchdown while also seeing 6 targets in the pass game. And while Allen was the priority pickup with the Hall injury news, Davis is most certainly worth a pickup with a nice matchup coming up against Jacksonville. I know I had said on the matchup show that if Breece Hall is out, I don't know if you could trust either of these two running backs in this offense. And I mainly said that because they hadn't been giving a lot of opportunities to a healthy Breece Hall, right? Like they had this tandem of like Breece Hall and Braylon Allen, and they did not seem interested in giving those two guys, a decent amount of work there. And so I'm thinking it's going to be a 50-50 split of like 20 touches or 20 opportunities, but it turned out to be a 50-50 split of 32 opportunities, and that is a whole lot better. I don't want to say never saw something like that with Breece Hall and Braylon Allen, but we rarely saw that with Breece Hall and Braylon Allen. Now, we've got a matchup against Jacksonville, who entering week 14 allowed the 5th most PPR points to opposing running backs. I'd have to imagine that number has it's only gotten better since what they allowed to Tony Pollard on Sunday. But I think Isaiah Davis is he's looks like a pretty decent player. In this limited time that he's gotten opportunities with the Jets. He runs hard. He's utilized in the pass game as well. They trust him in the pass game. So I think Davis is somebody that, if you, and this is the tough thing with the Breece Hall thing, right? Like I'm hoping just for multiple reasons, right? Like the Jet supporter, I don't want to say fan because I have a tough time with them right now, but Breece Hall should just sit, right? Like if you got a knee injury, he's the long-term, your long-term answer at the running back position. This season is going nowhere. Sit him down, send him to the injured reserve, even if you have to, and don't let him play the rest of the season. And then let Braylon Allen and Isaiah Davis take this backfield over for the rest of the season. And I think that would be the best thing for fantasy managers, because if Breece Hall is healthy, what you're probably looking at is them working all 3 of these running backs in. And I don't think and you're going to be tempted to play Breece Hall, and I don't know if Breece Hall really gets any of the high value stuff, right? Like I don't know if he'll be utilized around the goal line. He seemed like he was taken out in passing situations in week 13 when he did play. So if it goes to a two-man backfield, I think it's very defined in terms of the roles, and I think that would be much easier for fantasy managers to navigate in week 15 and and so on. So, but I think Isaiah Davis definitely worth a pickup. I mean, one of my leagues, thank God, I had already clinched, but Brees Hall, stuff was happening, and I didn't have Braylon Allen because I dropped him during the bye week, and somebody else picked him up, and so I really needed a running back help, and so I just picked up Isaiah Davis, and was able to score 15 PPR points, and so yeah, I definitely like Davis. Moving on to the next guy on this list, that's San Francisco running back Patrick Taylor Jr., available in 96% of Yahoo leagues, and now we have chaos again. So after Garendo looked like he was on his way to potentially being a league winner, he's dealing with a foot sprain that Shanahan is calling day to day, which I often say is coach speak for week to week. So with a game on Thursday Night Football for the 49ers, I would fully anticipate Taylor being the lead back for the San Francisco 49ers. And, some people were smart. They were forward thinking. They picked up Patrick Taylor ahead of the Garendo injury in the event that Garendo did get injured. So things like that do obviously happen. So I think, Patrick Taylor, definitely worth a pickup. We definitely want running backs in the Shanahan offense. I, however, would prioritize these other guys because we know their roles. They're defined, I think, between Bigsby and Isaiah Davis, where Patrick Taylor, it's dependent on Garendo being what Garendo's status is. And I'm a bit more sure that Brees Hall is probably going to sit versus, what Garendo's status is. Now, Garendo very much could be out. We very much could want the, San Francisco running back. But I guess what I'm trying to say is I wouldn't completely throw all my eggs into the Patrick Taylor basket from a fab perspective because if Garendo is healthy this week or healthy next week, you're not going to get maybe the opportunities that these other two guys may get. So that's just the rationale there. Moving on to the next guy is Las Vegas running back Sincere McCormick. He is available in 85% of Yahoo leagues. And, well, it looks like McCormick might be the lead back for the Raiders. Now, granted, I'm not sure how excited we should be about this matchup as the Raiders are set to play Atlanta with Desmond Ridder under center. Maybe more of an incentive for them to run the ball, but could be a situation where the Raiders are down and throwing a lot, which is not exactly McCormick's game. But he's worth an add as he's going to see attempts and potentially a touchdown if things break his way. But to me, he's a volume-dependent RB3. We need to start running back. So if you need a running back, I think he's obviously for sure got to be in consideration for you as not just a waiver wire pickup, but a pickup and a start as well. Moving on to the next guy on this list, that's Cleveland running back Jerome Ford, available in 59% of Yahoo leagues. So for 2 weeks in a row, Ford has outsnapped Nick Chubb. And this has had to do presumably with game script falling that way. And with a matchup against Kansas City in week 15, it very much could be a similar story. So I think Ford is worth a look for those in need of help at the running back position. I know for me, I had alluded earlier to a guy that I'm not really excited to play in week 15, and that's Nick Chubb, right? Like, I would pick up the Tank Bigsby, the Isaiah Davis, the Patrick Taylor, even the Jerome Ford, and I would play them ahead of Nick Chubb. I mean, I just find it very hard to trust Nick Chubb, who's been outsnapped by fellow teammate Jerome Ford 2 weeks in a row. And again, you can make the argument that his game script it possibly is. The Denver Cleveland game was not that it was like the Browns were still in it, right? I mean, and you could say, oh well, the Browns were trying to get into a pass happy offense that day against Denver, and it's like, yeah, sure, you could argue that too, but it almost seemed like some point during that game they decided to bench Nick Chubb. At least that's how it looked when I was watching it. Now, I say that to say I like Nick Chubb's matchups the next 2 weeks, right? He's got Cincinnati next week, and then he's got Miami the week after. So those are two matchups where I look at it and I say, hey, yeah, I want to play Nick Chubb in those matchups potentially, specifically the Cincinnati one. But this week I can't trust Nick Chubb this week. Absolutely cannot. But Jerome Ford, definitely worth a look. Next running back on this list, that is Washington running back Jeremy McNichols, available in 94% of Yahoo leagues. Austin Eckler went on injured reserve a couple weeks ago. McNichols saw more usage in week 13, but that game quickly got out of hand in Washington's favor as they were taking on the Titans. And so they ultimately turned to Chris Rodriguez as their lead back down the stretch, right? So Brian Robinson comes in, has, I think it was 2 long runs, at least one touchdown there. Jaden Daniels had a touchdown, touchdown by the goal line. And so McNichols is getting some usage, right? He's getting some snaps. But as this game gets out of hand, he has 6 carries for 32 yards. As this game gets out of hand, McNichols becomes a non-factor because they essentially sat down Brian Robinson, they sat down Jeremy McNichols, and they put Chris Rodriguez in the game. And Rodriguez ends up playing more snaps than McNichols, slightly less snaps than Brian Robinson, rushed 13 times for 94 yards and a touchdown. So I think it's possible that it was game script dependent, and game flow that dictated the usage between these guys. So for me, I think McNichols is still worth a look in deeper leagues if you need help at the running back position. Maybe you get a little bit more clarity on the rules from from the coaching staff during the week, but that's just how, reading the tea leaves, that's kind of how I see it. And moving on to the rest of the running backs, right? So again, there's these notable running backs that are available in 50% or more of Yahoo leagues. And I only have 4 because these are the guys that are kind of on that borderline where they get enough work to be like fringe RB3s in a real pinch, like a real pinch. And RB3s I think is generous. But they are also like, really, call them playoff stashes, really essentially is what I'm trying to get at. But Kendre Miller, available in 96% of Yahoo leagues, talked about him on the matchup show. He, 10 carries, 32 yards, a touchdown against the Giants, plays Washington this week. Not expecting a ton of production from him, but he is going to get, if he does get that volume again, you're banking on some volume and maybe a rushing touchdown. But, the offensive situation for the Saints is not going to be great with Jake Haener under center for the Saints against Washington. So, but Miller is pretty much he's leapfrogged Jamal Williams as the number 2 running back behind Alvin Kamara. And then there's Kamani Vidal, available in 87% of Yahoo leagues. I think we're just like patiently waiting for Vidal to take this running back, this lead back role away from Gus Edwards. I mean, we're just patiently waiting because he's more explosive than Gus. Gus still is operating as the lead back, but Vidal was able to get, I think it was 8 carries for 34 yards, if I'm not mistaken, while against Kansas City, while Gus Edwards had 10 for 36. So Vidal was slightly more efficient on his touches. Surprisingly, no one's really taken any of the pass work from that J.K. Dobbins left behind, at least not these running backs. And so Vidal is somebody that I think it's trending in a direction where he's going to be at a minimum 50-50 split And could he take it over just because he's the more explosive running back, or could he, even at a 50-50 split, could he make enough plays that he deserves like at least a look in our lineups? I think so, right? So, just keep that in mind as we move forward. But I think Vidal should be rostered the remainder of these fantasy football playoffs. And Blake Corum, available in 84% of Yahoo leagues. He was getting more work this past weekend. I think he was also 8 carries for 34 yards. Yes, him and Vidal had the same stat line. 8 carries for 34 yards. This is the second week he's had 8 carries. So it seems like Corum is getting some regular usage in the backfield. Kyron Williams saw 31 touches on Sunday, so I don't think it's an opportunity. I don't think it's a situation where we're approaching a 50-50 split. But Blake Corum, if you are especially if you're the Kyron Williams manager, I think you need to roster Blake Corum. Like, you absolutely have to roster Blake Corum as the Kyron Williams manager, because you just don't want anything to happen down the stretch here where you can't have an insurance policy and you got to spend a ton of fab, or you're getting outbid for Blake Corum when you had Kyron Williams. So and then the last on this list is Sean Tucker, available in 98% of Yahoo leagues. And I bring his name up because Bucky Irving's dealing with a back injury. And if Bucky Irving is forced to miss any time, obviously Rachaad White becomes, an every down back essentially. But Sean Tucker, I think, would earn some role here as the second back in the 2-man backfield, essentially, right? So, he did get some touches, some opportunities in the game, but he's a different player than Bucky Irving. He's not going to catch a ton of passes like Bucky Irving does. I think Rachaad White will do that, but Sean Tucker can do some of the early down stuff that Rachaad White has been doing alongside Bucky Irving, right? So, I think he's worth a look. And then obviously there's the other names, right? The names that we've talked about all year from a security blanket perspective at the running back position. I'm not going to get into them, right? The backup running backs, the teams that they play for, and the guys that could fall into some volume if an injury happens. So while you're sitting there, you got an empty spot on your roster. You've got, maybe if you're on a bye week in your league, pick some of these guys up. And obviously I would bid on some of these other running backs that we've talked about, but pick some of these other backup running backs up if you're on a bye, and if something happens, then you don't have to spend fab to try to get one of these running backs if an injury were to happen. So moving on to the wide receiver position, let's talk about Tampa Bay wide receiver Jalen McMillan, available 95% of Yahoo leagues. And yeah, there goes that breakout folks have been waiting for from the rookie wide receiver. Saw 7 targets, which he converted to 4 receptions for 59 receiving yards and 2 touchdowns. Maybe we can look to him in a week against an LA Chargers defense, allowing the 7th most PPR points to the position coming into week 14. So I think McMillan definitely worth a look. Is he going to score 2 touchdowns again? No. But 7 targets is definitely something that we like to see, right? We've been kind of waiting for McMillan. We thought it would happen when both the Bucs wide receivers were out, but we didn't really see that then. So, hopefully this is something that he can continue down this stretch here, with Baker Mayfield in this Tampa Bay Bucs offense. Moving on to the next guy on this list. Actually, it's really 2 guys. It's Quentin Johnston, available in 60% of Yahoo leagues. And this one's dependent on the status of Justin Herbert. It looks like Herbert's banged up, dealing with a knee injury. He may play. Herbert's a tough guy, so has a matchup against Tampa Bay, which we love this Tampa Bay matchup, right? So I think Quentin Johnston is definitely in play there. And then we've got a matchup, then we've got Joshua Palmer of the LA Chargers, available in 84% of Yahoo leagues. And this one's dependent on both the status of Justin Herbert and Ladd McConkey. Joshua Palmer is a good player. I feel like he needs more opportunities in this Chargers offense. But for whatever reason, he doesn't get those opportunities unless Ladd McConkey or Quentin Johnston is out. So Joshua Palmer needs, it seems, unless until the Chargers are able to, I guess, adjust and play Joshua Palmer more reliably. I think we're in a situation here where it's got to be, we've got to be looking for, an injury in this Chargers offense here for, for Joshua Palmer to bring back some real value. Anyway, moving on to the next guy on this list, Nick Westbrook-Ikhine, available in 59% of Yahoo leagues. And of course this happened, right? Like, I don't talk about the dude all year because I'm like touchdown regression. And I'm like, oh, but I love this matchup this week. And maybe he'll score a touchdown again against Jacksonville. And of course this happened, right? He doesn't do any of that. However, Will Levis was hurt in that game, which I think might have limited his passing ability. A part of me hopes we just get Mason Rudolph for week 15 against Cincinnati, because yes, we love Cincinnati. So we know they obviously struggle against wide receivers, and Nick Westbrook-Ikhine, along with Calvin Ridley, could have himself a nice day if if Cincinnati obviously continues what they're doing against wide receivers, but specifically if Mason Rudolph is starting at quarterback for the Tennessee Titans, because it's hard trusting Will Levis as it is anyway, but trusting an injured Will Levis, I'm not really trying to do that, right? So, and maybe you're like me and you've lost George Pickens for what looks like at least this week and maybe next week. So you have limited places to turn, like to Nick Westbrook-Ikhine. And the last guy on this list at the wide receiver position, I've been talking about him for several weeks in a row now, but Buffalo wide receiver Keon Coleman. It seems like they want him to be completely and fully healthy. This is tough, right? Because I brought him up like 2 weeks in a row. He seems to be injured, but he did get limited practices in last week. Hopefully he can get at least one full practice in this week. Obviously, we talked about him in the weeks leading up, but I'll say it again, had back-to-back top 16 finishes with 7 targets in each of the 2 games that the 2 full games that he last played prior to suffering his wrist injury in week 9, with at least 125 yards and a touchdown or a touchdown, and scoring no less than 16.5 PPR points in those 2 games. Coleman, I think, could be the lead back here or the lead wide receiver here for Josh Allen. Obviously, Khalil Shakir, we know the space that he operates in, but Coleman provides that true outside presence that I think this Buffalo offense really, really could use right now. All right, moving on to the tight end position, and Zach Ertz available in 56% of Yahoo leagues. Again, it's not super exciting to start Zach Ertz. I don't know how he's made it this long to be this available in fantasy football leagues, but he's reliable, deserves a spot on rosters, and for teams looking at help at the tight end position for sure. Moving on to the next player on this list, New England tight end Hunter Henry, available in 53% of Yahoo leagues. Henry has had at least 5 targets in 7 of his last 8 games, scoring at least 9 PPR points in each of those 7 games. He's a more than solid option at the position, although he does have a tough matchup this week against Arizona. Arizona has been pretty good against defending tight ends. I believe they might still be the only team to not allow a touchdown to opposing tight ends. Let me fact check that really quick. But yeah, it's a tough matchup, but I think with Hunter Henry, you're just hoping that he gets volume. Oh no, Arizona has now allowed 2 touchdowns to tight ends. There was a long stretch where they have not allowed a touchdown to a tight end, but they're one of 12 teams. No, one of 8 teams to allow 2 touchdowns or less to opposing tight ends all season. So, moving on to the next guy on this list, let's go with Philadelphia Eagles tight end Grant Calcaterra. Available in 96% of Yahoo leagues. Calcaterra, filling in for an injured Dallas Goedert, has scored at least 8 PPR points in 4 of the 5 games that he filled in as a starting tight end for the Eagles. This week, he faces off against a Pittsburgh defense that entered Week 14, allowing the 10th most PPR points to the tight end position over their previous 3 games. So I think Grant Calcaterra is a sneaky add and play at the tight end position at a time where we often are not able to find starting caliber tight ends. The next tight end on this list, the last tight end on this list, Tennessee tight end Chig Okonkwo, available in 95% of Yahoo leagues. This one is not for the faint of heart. I warn you now. He can easily ruin your day or make your day. There's no in between with Chig. But this matchup here is a great one against a Cincinnati defense that, I talked about early in the week, last week on the waiver show about Luke Schoonmaker, and then this, past weekend in regards to Jake Ferguson. And that didn't really come to fruition last night because Cooper Rush kind of stinks, and I'm never going to talk about him again. But anyway, neither here nor there. Cincinnati is one of those teams that, we definitely want to target in the pass game as frequently as we can. And with Chig Okonkwo, again, he's feast or famine literally at the tight end position. But if you're looking for somebody with some significant upside who's definitely available, I think Chig makes a ton of sense here for you. Now, something that we haven't done all year, but I felt like with the fantasy football playoffs here, I was going to talk about some defenses, right? So let's talk about some defenses that we can go and we can pick up and we can help us to bring us these chips, man, in these fantasy football playoffs. So the top defense on my list this week is the Washington defense, Washington Commanders, available in 77% of Yahoo leagues. They are 7.5-point favorites on the road, but against Jake Haener. So again, please don't overthink this one. And if you were lucky enough to grab them over the weekend as they were on bye, as soon as the New Orleans injury happened, it was one of those savvy things you could have done was go ahead and pick up Washington DST because they were, again, widely available, 22%, I think, at the time that I had checked on the weekend, but now they're up to 23% right now. So available in 77% of Yahoo leagues. They should be the number one ad at the defense position, of the teams, of the defenses that are widely available. The next DST is Atlanta, available in 91% of Yahoo leagues. They are 4.5-point favorites on the road. Again, not excited to play them, but they have been getting to the quarterback recently with 9 sacks over their last 2 games. And they're playing Desmond Ridder, who in his career gets sacked at a slightly above average league rate. And in his career also throws interceptions at a slightly above average league rate. So I know it's a revenge game for Desmond Ridder, but is it possibly a revenge game for the Falcons? Anyway, let's talk about the Dallas defense and special teams. Available in 60% of Yahoo leagues. Dallas has been playing a lot better on defense with Micah Parsons back in the fold. Obviously, they've gotten some help in the secondary as well. Trayvon Diggs is healthy. Deron Bland has came back. They did just lose their linebacker last night, it looked like, Demarion Overshown. But for the most part, the important pieces of that Dallas defense are intact. and they look like, I'm not saying they look like the defense from last year, but they're starting to get into form here, it looks like. And so they play Carolina this week, 1.5 point dogs on the road against Carolina, which I think is interesting. But that's not a line that I look at and say, oh, well, you know, Dallas is significant underdogs. Don't really want to play them. But I think you can get away with playing this Dallas defense this week. And especially like if you play in a league where, the defense gets the return touchdowns. I mean, Kevontae Turpin's probably the most dangerous return man in the league right now. So you also get exposure to that as well when you play the Dallas DST. So yeah, I think Dallas is a great option if you can't get Washington, even Atlanta. I mean, I haven't done my projections for the week yet. I'll do those tonight, but Washington, Dallas, I think as I sit here talking about it, my gut tells me I would play them over Atlanta, but I'll see what the final numbers look like. And then last DST that I'm going to talk about is the Green Bay Packers defense special teams, available in 63% of Yahoo leagues. Green Bay 3-point favorites on the road against Seattle. And while this is one that, we can totally get away with playing them against Seattle because they've been a solid defense all season, I'm actually even more excited to play them in week 16 when they play New Orleans. Jake Haener, right? Let's not overthink that one. So if you can play Washington this week and then Green Bay next week, you're essentially playing against New Orleans. You're playing against New Orleans 2 weeks in a row. I'm curious to see now who New Orleans plays in week 17, because let's just complete the trifecta at that point, right? They play Las Vegas. Ooh, I don't know if I want to do that. Anyway, definitely Washington this week in week 15 against New Orleans, and definitely Green Bay next week against New Orleans, and possibly Green Bay this week against Seattle. Because Green Bay, again, they've been a solid defense all year. So, and obviously check your defensive scoring. Some leagues are different, but if you're doing standard scoring, I think, Washington, a coin flip between Dallas and Atlanta, but right now I lean Dallas. And then Green Bay is a cool third. But if I can just get Washington and Green Bay for the week, for the next 2 weeks, I'm cool with that as well. So that is all I got. Surprised to see not many questions today, but hopefully y'all are squared away. You know what you're going to do, how you're going to attack this waiver, this waiver period coming up. But just make sure you are locked in here Friday morning, 7 a.m. Eastern, as we'll be doing the matchup show. And for those that haven't seen the matchup show, again, we look at guys that are ranked outside the top 20, running backs and wide receivers outside the top 20 of their respective positions, according to Fantasy Pros expert consensus rankings. And we say, hey, which of these guys should you look at? Which of these guys do you want to potentially play? And then also we look at quarterbacks, tight ends outside that top 10 of guys that you can play. And then on the flip side, we look at guys potentially inside those same thresholds as guys you might want to sit down this week. So, hopefully I'll enjoy the show, and hopefully you guys have a great waiver period, and we'll catch y'all on Friday for the matchup show. Have a good one. Catch y'all later. Peace.